Frank stood motionless on his own front lawn, the setting sun casting long shadows across the suitcases at his feet. After 15 years of marriage, his belongings sat in neat piles beside the rose bushes he'd planted last spring. "She can't be serious," he whispered, the mortgage statement in his pocket a cruel reminder of who paid for the house he was now locked out of. Through the living room window, he could see his brother-in-law lounging in Frank's recliner, beer in hand, same as every evening for the past 8 months. The same brother-in-law whose freeloading had finally pushed Frank to speak up at dinner. "Either he contributes or he leaves," Frank had said, reasonable words that had somehow exploded his marriage. His phone buzzed. A text from Lisa. "You should have known better than to make me choose." Frank Adams eased his sedan into the driveway, noting with familiar irritation the pickup truck still parked in what had once been his workshop space. 8 months and counting since his brother-in-law's temporary stay began. He gathered his briefcase, containing the accounting files he'd need to review this weekend, and locked the car. Inside, the scent of microwaved pizza greeted him, not the homemade meals Lisa used to prepare before Dwayne moved in. The living room television blared a basketball game, empty beer bottles standing like sentinels on the coffee table Frank had built for their 5th anniversary. "Hey, bro," Dwayne called without looking away from the screen. "Grabbed you a slice. It's in the kitchen." Frank nodded tightly. "Thanks. Long day at work?" Dwayne shrugged. "Not much happening. Still waiting on callbacks for those applications." The same answer for months now. Frank loosened his tie, catching Lisa's anxious glance from the kitchen. "Bills came today," she said quietly, nodding toward envelopes on the counter. Frank thumbed through them. Mortgage, utilities, credit cards. All addressed to him, all his responsibility, while a perfectly capable 38-year-old man occupied their guest room rent-free. "How was your day?" Lisa asked, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Fine," Frank replied, the weight of unspoken words pressing against his chest. "Just fine." Dinner passed with forced conversation about neighborhood gossip and Lisa's job at the dental office. Frank waited until they'd finished eating, until Lisa had cleared the plates and Dwayne was reaching for another beer. "We need to talk," Frank said, his voice calm but firm. "All of us." Lisa paused, dishcloth in hand. "What about?" "About our living arrangement." Frank turned to Dwayne. "It's been 8 months now." Dwayne's expression shifted from relaxed to guarded. "Yeah? What about it?" "When you moved in, we agreed it would be temporary, until you got back on your feet." Lisa moved closer to her brother. "Frank, we've discussed this. Family helps family." "I agree," Frank nodded. "And I've been helping for 8 months, providing a roof, food, utilities, but I think it's reasonable now to ask for some contribution." Dwayne's face darkened. "You think I'm not trying to find work?" "I think you could contribute something while you look, even a few hundred toward groceries and utilities." "So that's how it is?" Dwayne stood, towering over the table. "Mr. Big Shot Accountant thinks I'm a freeloader?" "I didn't say that," Frank maintained his measured tone. "I'm simply asking for some help with household expenses." "Frank!" Lisa's voice rose. "How could you? He's my brother." "And I'm your husband," Frank replied, surprised by her reaction. "I've supported your decision to help him, but there has to be a limit." "The limit?" Lisa's face flushed. "The limit is when my brother isn't struggling anymore. You make plenty of money. This is just pettiness." Frank felt something crack inside him. "Pettiness?" "I've paid every bill, covered every expense, never complained about the extra costs. How is asking for basic contribution pettiness? You know what? Dwayne interjected. I don't need this. I've got friends who'd be happy to have me stay. Then maybe you should call them, Frank said, his patience fraying. Lisa slammed her palm on the table. You're unbelievable. After everything we've been through, you'd throw my brother out on the street? That's not what I want you to leave, Lisa interrupted, her voice ice-cold. Frank stared at her, certain he'd misheard. What? If you can't accept my brother in our home, then maybe you should go. Frank stood in the bedroom, watching Lisa methodically emptying his dresser drawers into a suitcase. Her movements were mechanical, her expression closed. Outside the window, Dwayne loaded boxes into his pickup, not to leave, but to make space in the garage for what Lisa was now calling Frank's things. You can't be serious, Frank said, the wedding photo on their nightstand catching his eye. 15 years reduced to this. Lisa, this is our home. I'm not leaving. I've made my decision. She wouldn't meet his eyes. You can come back when you're ready to apologize to Dwayne and accept that he stays as long as he needs. Frank's hand instinctively reached for his wallet, where the mortgage statement lay folded. His name alone on the paperwork, his signature on every check. A strange calm settled over him. And if I don't leave? Lisa finally looked at him, something hard in her eyes he'd never seen before. Then I'll call the police and report domestic disturbance. How would that look for Mr. Respected Accountant? The threat left him speechless. He watched her zip the suitcase with finality. 20 minutes later, Frank stood in the driveway, suitcases and boxes arranged neatly beside him. The house key he'd removed from his key ring felt strangely heavy in his palm. Your choice, Frank, Lisa said from the doorway, arms crossed. Behind her, Dwayne's silhouette filled the hallway. Let me know when you're ready to be reasonable. Frank placed the key on top of the nearest box and turned away. He loaded his car in silence, each movement deliberate, hiding the trembling in his hands. He left the wedding album for last, placing it carefully on the passenger seat. As he drove away, the rear-view mirror showed his home growing smaller, Dwayne already closing the door before he'd reached the end of the street. At the Lakeside Motel's reception desk, Frank paid for 3 nights with a credit card that felt abnormally heavy. The room was clean, but soulless. Beige walls, generic landscape print, the faint scent of industrial cleaner. He set the wedding album on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed, the springs creaking under his weight. Only then, in the quiet anonymity of room 118, did Frank allow himself to open the album to their smiling faces and whisper, "What just happened to us?" Frank awoke disoriented, the unfamiliar ceiling tiles of room 118 momentarily confusing him. Then reality crashed back. He wasn't home. The wedding album still lay open on the nightstand, where he'd left it after hours of staring at happier times. His phone showed 3 missed calls from the office, but nothing from Lisa. He'd sent her 2 texts last night. We need to talk about this reasonably. And later, please call me when you're ready. Both remained unanswered, the blue delivery confirmation his only response. The motel room felt alien, too cool, too quiet without Lisa's morning routine. No coffee brewing, no soft humming as she prepared for work. Just the distant sounds of doors closing and cars starting in the parking lot. Frank showered using the miniature toiletries, his regular shaving kit forgotten in the hasty packing. The face in the mirror looked older somehow, lines deeper around the eyes. He straightened his shoulders and practiced his work expression, calm, controlled, professional, before reaching for his phone again. Still nothing. He organized his clothes in the particle board dresser, hanging his suits in the shallow closet. The methodical task, gave his hands something to do while his mind processed. 15 years of marriage, his home, his mortgage. Yet he was the one displaced. "One step at a time," he murmured, the sound of his voice startling in the empty room. He made a mental list: work supplies, contact clients about weekend meetings, extend motel stay, try calling Lisa again. By afternoon, the impersonal room held small touches of himself, laptop set up on the desk, financial journals stacked neatly beside it, wedding photo placed where he could see it from the bed. Not home, but a foothold in this strange new reality. The Golden Spoon Cafe sat halfway between Frank's office and Lisa's house. Neutral territory with enough ambient noise for privacy. Frank arrived 15 minutes early, securing a corner booth and ordering coffee while he waited. Lisa appeared precisely on time, her face composed but eyes wary. She slid into the booth without removing her jacket, a clear signal she didn't intend to stay long. "Thank you for meeting me," Frank began. "I have 20 minutes before my next appointment." She glanced at her watch. "What did you want to discuss?" "Us. This situation. I think we need to talk about what happened." The waitress appeared. Lisa ordered tea, then folded her hands on the table. "There's nothing to discuss." "You made your feelings about Dwayne clear." "Lisa, asking him to contribute isn't unreasonable. Most adults pay rent." "He's family, Frank. He's going through a tough time." "For 8 months? And how long before that with your parents?" Her expression hardened. "So now you're criticizing my parents too?" "No, I'm pointing out a pattern. Your family has been supporting him for years." "Because that's what family does." Lisa stirred her tea aggressively when it arrived. "I wouldn't expect you to understand with your independent upbringing." Frank took a measured breath. "My parents taught me self-reliance. There's a difference between helping someone and enabling them." "Enabling?" Her voice rose slightly. "He's not an addict, Frank. He's my brother, who hasn't held a steady job in years, who forgets job interviews, who always has excuses why the timing isn't right. The economy is difficult. His industry has changed. He hasn't even contributed to groceries, Lisa." "And not once." She set down her cup with a sharp click. "Is that what this is about? Money? You've always been so tight with it." The unfairness of the accusation stung. "I've never once complained about supporting our household, but there has to be a limit. The limit is when family doesn't need help anymore." Lisa checked her watch again. "I need to go." "Wait." Frank reached across but stopped short of touching her hand. "When can I come home?" "When you accept that Dwayne stays as long as he needs. Those are my terms." Something shifted in Frank as he watched her gather her purse. "And if I can't accept those terms? Then I guess you've made your choice." She stood, her voice softening slightly. "I miss you, Frank, but I won't choose between my husband and my brother." As she walked away, Frank realized with sudden clarity that she already had. Frank arrived at First National precisely at 9:00 a.m., his portfolio of financial documents organized in his leather binder. The branch manager, Harold Winters, greeted him warmly, 15 years of business giving Frank priority treatment. "What can we do for you today, Mr. Adams?" Harold asked, ushering him into a private office. "I need to make some changes to my accounts," Frank replied, his decision crystallized during a sleepless night after the cafe meeting. "Significant ones." 30 minutes later, Frank had opened a new individual checking account, redirected his direct deposit from the joint account, and revised his automatic payments. He left his name on the joint account, but removed all but the minimum required balance. "May I ask if everything is all right?" Harold inquired, clearly noting the unusual changes. "Just some household reorganization," Frank answered, with professional detachment. "My wife and I are reassessing our financial arrangements." Harold nodded, understanding the unspoken. "These changes will take effect with your next paycheck." "Is there anything else we can help with today?" "Yes, actually. Can you recommend a good realtor? I'm looking for a short-term apartment rental." That afternoon, Frank viewed 3 apartments with the realtor Harold had suggested. The third, a one-bedroom unit in Oakwood Gardens, had simple, clean lines and a small balcony overlooking a courtyard. Not luxurious, but peaceful. "It's available immediately with a 6-month lease," the realtor explained. "Furnished option adds $200 monthly." Frank calculated quickly. With his salary, he could afford this place and still maintain the mortgage payments on the house. Lisa's dental office income wouldn't cover the remaining household expenses, though, not with Dwayne contributing nothing. "I'll take it," Frank said, surprising himself with the decisiveness. "Furnished, please." As he signed the rental agreement, a strange sense of lightness touched him. This wasn't what he wanted, but having a plan felt better than the limbo of the motel room. 6 months would give Lisa time to realize the consequences of her choice, or give him time to accept that their marriage might truly be over. He scheduled the move-in for Saturday, then drove to the motel to extend his stay for 2 more nights. The wedding album sat waiting on the nightstand, but tonight Frank carefully closed it before beginning to pack again. Frank stood in the center of his new apartment, surveying the changes he'd made over the past week. The furnished rental had come with basic pieces, a sofa, coffee table, bed, and desk, but the space now reflected his presence in small but meaningful ways. His accounting books lined the shelves in precise order. His grandmother's antique clock, one of the few heirlooms he'd remembered to take, ticked steadily on the mantel. The kitchen contained exactly what a single man needed: a coffee maker, one-place setting, basic cookware. He'd surprised himself by enjoying the process of creating order from emptiness. Morning sunlight streamed through the balcony doors he'd deliberately left uncurtained, unlike the heavy drapes Lisa had insisted on at home. The light created patterns on the hardwood floor, something he found himself watching while drinking his morning coffee. His routine had emerged naturally. Up at 6, coffee while reviewing reports, office by 8, dinner at home with case files or a book. Weekend mornings at the nearby cafe where they knew his order now: black coffee and wheat toast. Simple, predictable, strangely peaceful. At times, the silence pressed in, reminding him of Lisa's absence. He'd catch himself turning to share a thought with someone who wasn't there. But these moments came less frequently now. He'd hung only one photo, not their wedding portrait, but a candid shot from a hiking trip 5 years ago. They looked happy, relaxed. Before Dwayne, before everything changed. Frank straightened a cushion and checked his watch. Sunday evening, stretching before him, quiet and uncomplicated. No basketball games blaring, no empty beer bottles to clear away, no walking on eggshells. The freedom felt like both a gift and a wound. Independence gained at the price of connection. His phone hadn't rung all weekend. The Mozart sonata playing through Frank's wireless speaker cut off abruptly as his phone rang. Lisa's name on the screen sent a jolt through him. 3 weeks since the cafe meeting, 2 since any contact. "Hello," he answered, keeping his voice neutral. "Frank." Lisa's voice sounded tight. "We need to talk about the bills." He settled onto the sofa, gazing at the city lights visible from his balcony. "What about them?" "The mortgage payment came out of our joint account, but there wasn't enough to cover it. The bank called." "I transferred my portion," Frank replied evenly. "Exactly half, same as always." Half? The pitch of her voice rose. You know your salary covers more than half our expenses. We've always pooled everything. That was when we shared a household. The situation has changed. A pause, then. So, you're punishing me financially? No, Lisa. I'm respecting the choice you made. You chose to have Dwayne stay without contribution. I chose to live separately rather than accept that arrangement. We're both living with the consequences of those choices. The mortgage is in your name. You can't just... I'm paying exactly half. The other half would logically come from your income and Dwayne's contribution. Frank kept his tone measured, despite the tightness in his chest. Is he helping with expenses yet? Silence stretched between them. Then, he's still looking for the right opportunity. I see. Frank closed his eyes briefly. So nothing has changed. Frank, please. The power bill is past due, and the credit card minimum. Lisa, I've been fair. Half the mortgage, half the insurance. But I'm not subsidizing your brother's lifestyle anymore. This isn't about Dwayne. Her voice cracked slightly. This is our life, our home. Was our home, Frank corrected gently. You made it clear whose home it is now. So that's it? 15 years and you just walk away? The unfairness of her framing sent a flash of heat through him. I didn't walk away, Lisa. I was thrown out. There's a difference. Another long silence. What am I supposed to do? The same thing any adult does. Make choices and accept the consequences. Frank's voice softened despite himself. Or reconsider the terms you set. I can't choose between you and my brother. You already did. Frank gazed at the hiking photo on his wall. I need to go. Good night, Lisa. He ended the call and sat motionless, the apartment suddenly too quiet around him. The Mozart resumed mid-measure, filling the silence but not the emptiness. The community mailboxes stood at the entrance to Oakwood Gardens, a daily ritual Frank had come to appreciate. Today, Ellen Miller from 3B was collecting her mail as well, her silver hair immaculately styled despite the drizzling rain. Evening, Frank, she greeted him, sorting through envelopes. Terrible weather we're having. It should clear by morning, he replied, with a polite smile. Ellen had been the first to welcome him to the building, bringing over homemade cookies with a directness that reminded him of his mother. How are you settling in? She asked, a perceptive glint in her eyes. At 70-something, Ellen missed nothing. Fine, thank you. The apartment suits my needs. She nodded, seeming to weigh her next words. I noticed your visitor the other day. Blonde woman seemed upset when she left. Frank's hands stilled on his mailbox key. My wife, he admitted. We're taking some time apart. Ah. Ellen's expression held no judgment. My second husband and I did that once. Sometimes distance provides clarity. Frank nodded, appreciating her tact. He'd seen Lisa's car in the visitor parking 3 days ago, but had been in a conference call. She'd left without coming up. Actually, Ellen continued, closing her mailbox, she was talking with Jim at the leasing office. I was dropping off my rent check. I see. Frank kept his tone neutral, though curiosity stirred. Ellen hesitated, then added, I couldn't help overhearing. She seemed quite concerned about your lease length, and something about her brother staying with her? Frank's attention sharpened. Did she mention anything specific about her brother? Only that he wasn't working yet, but had promising leads. Ellen's eyes narrowed slightly. Though between us, when a woman says her brother has a lifestyle consulting business starting soon, I wonder what that actually means. Frank extracted his mail, processing this information. "And she was asking about my lease?" "Yes. Seemed worried you'd signed a long-term one." Ellen adjusted her scarf. "She mentioned the house bills were becoming difficult. Said something about hoping you'd come to your senses soon." A complex emotion settled in Frank's chest. Not satisfaction, but confirmation. Lisa was struggling financially, but still enabling Dwayne, still expecting Frank to return on her terms. "Thank you, Ellen," he said, mind already calculating what this meant. "I appreciate your candor." "Young man," she replied with a knowing smile, "I've been around long enough to recognize when someone's taking advantage. Whether it's your wife or her brother, well, that's not for me to say." As Ellen walked toward her building, Frank remained by the mailboxes, rain dampening his shoulders. The revelation shouldn't have surprised him, yet somehow, hearing that nothing had changed, that Lisa was feeling the pressure, but Dwayne remained comfortably established in their home, clarified something fundamental. This wasn't just about money or living arrangements. It was about patterns that wouldn't change until someone held firm. The question was how long he could maintain his position, and at what cost to the marriage he still hoped to save. Frank's phone chimed with text notifications at increasingly frequent intervals over the next 2 weeks. Each message from Lisa followed a pattern that had become all too familiar. "Credit card payment is due tomorrow. Can you transfer your half?" "Refrigerator making strange noises. Repair estimate is $340. Property tax installment due next week. Need your portion." Each time, Frank responded with measured calm, transferring exactly half of regular household expenses to their joint account, declining to cover unexpected costs without discussion. One evening, as he reviewed quarterly reports in his apartment, his phone lit up again. "Frank, the homeowner's insurance lapsed. They won't reinstate without full payment." He set down his pen, feeling the weight of the ongoing siege. Each request was reasonable in isolation. These were shared responsibilities. Yet the subtext remained unaddressed. No mention of Dwayne's contribution. No acknowledgement that their arrangement had fundamentally changed. "I transferred my half last month," he typed. "Did you make your payment?" The response came quickly. "You know my dental office hours were cut. I can't cover everything alone." Frank stared at the message. Lisa's part-time work at the dental practice had always been supplemental income, not their primary support. That had been his role, a role he'd never complained about until Dwayne's endless stay upset the balance. "Has Dwayne found work yet?" he asked, already knowing the answer. The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. "That's not the issue. Our house could be uninsured, Frank." He felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Each communication eroded something between them: trust, partnership, mutual respect. Yet each time he responded with financial support without addressing the root problem, he enabled the very dynamic he was trying to change. "I'll transfer my half again," he finally wrote. "But Lisa, this pattern isn't sustainable." Her reply was simply, "Thank you." Frank completed the transfer, then silenced his phone and returned to his reports, the numbers blurring slightly before his eyes. The emotional toll of maintaining his boundary was growing, despite his outward composure. But something told him they were approaching a breaking point where something would have to give. Frank was preparing dinner when his phone rang. Lisa's name appeared on the screen, but instead of the usual text message, this was a call, unusual in their new communication pattern. He wiped his hands and answered. "Frank?" Her voice sounded different, tight, almost panicked. "The electricity is off." He set down the knife he'd been using to chop vegetables. What do you mean? I mean, they shut it off. No warning, nothing. I just got home, and everything's dark. The sound of movement came through the line. The refrigerator, everything, and it's freezing in here. Frank glanced out his window at the January evening, temperature well below freezing. Did you get a disconnection notice? Maybe, I don't know. There were so many bills. Her voice caught. Dwayne usually brings in the mail when I'm at work. The implied accusation hung unspoken, that somehow Frank should have prevented this despite their separation. Have you called the utility company? He asked, keeping his voice even. They're closed. Customer service opens at 8 a.m. A muffled sound that might have been a sob. Frank, I can't stay here tonight. It's already down to 50 degrees inside. He closed his eyes, visualizing their home growing colder by the hour. What about Dwayne? Where is he? Out with friends. The bitterness in her voice was new. His phone goes straight to voicemail. Frank's apartment was warm, lights glowing softly, dinner in progress. The contrast with Lisa's situation created a moral dilemma he hadn't anticipated. You could go to a hotel, he suggested, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. With what money, Frank? I've been stretching every dollar since you left. I didn't leave, Lisa. You threw me out. The correction came automatically, though he regretted the timing. Look, I'll transfer enough for a hotel room tonight. Tomorrow you can call the utility company and arrange payment. Silence stretched between them. Then, I can't do this anymore. Do what? Pretend we can live separate lives, and it doesn't matter. Pretend I can manage everything alone. Her voice hardened. You need to come home, Frank. This has gone on long enough. The request, no, demand, struck him like a physical blow. Have the circumstances changed? Is Dwayne moving out? This isn't about Dwayne. The desperation in her voice escalated. This is about us, our marriage. You're punishing me to prove a point. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm refusing to enable a situation I find unacceptable. Frank's voice remained steady despite the turmoil inside him. I miss you, Lisa. I miss our life together. But I won't return to being taken advantage of. So you'll let me freeze instead? The accusation hung in the air. I offered to pay for a hotel. Frank felt the distance between them widening with each exchange. I've continued supporting household expenses equally. What I won't do is return to the same situation that drove me away. Transfer the hotel money, she said finally, her voice flat. But Frank, this can't continue. You need to decide what matters more, your pride or our marriage. After they disconnected, Frank stood in his warm kitchen, the half-prepared meal forgotten. The realization settled heavily. Something would break soon, either his resolve or their marriage. Perhaps both. The cafe, where they'd met weeks earlier, seemed a fitting place for this conversation. Frank arrived early again, securing the same corner booth. When Lisa entered, her expression was set in a way he recognized from their worst arguments, determined, almost rehearsed. Thank you for meeting me, she said, sliding into the booth without removing her coat, echoing their previous encounter. Your message said it was important. Frank kept his tone neutral, though tension hummed between them. It is. Lisa placed her hands flat on the table. I've been to see a lawyer. The words hung in the air, their weight disproportionate to their simplicity. Frank felt something cold settle in his stomach. A divorce lawyer? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Yes. She met his eyes directly. This separation has gone on for almost 2 months, Frank. The house is falling apart. Bills are piling up. I can't live like this anymore." "I see." Frank struggled to keep his expression composed. Despite their problems, divorce had seemed theoretical until this moment. And what did the lawyer advise? That I'm entitled to continued financial support. That abandonment is grounds for— "Abandonment?" Frank interrupted, his calm slipping. "Lisa, you threw me out of our home. You threatened to call the police if I didn't leave. Because you were being unreasonable about my brother." Color rose in her cheeks. "And now you're using money to force me to choose." "I've maintained my financial responsibilities. What I haven't done is subsidize your brother's lifestyle." Frank's wedding ring caught the light as he gestured. "How is Dwayne, by the way? Still job hunting?" Lisa's expression tightened. "Don't change the subject. We're talking about our marriage." "No, we're talking about your ultimatum. First it was leave the house, now it's return or face divorce. Neither addresses the actual problem." "Fine." Lisa leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen. Either you move back home and resume full financial support, or I file for divorce and seek spousal support, which the lawyer assures me I'll get given the income disparity." Frank studied his wife's face, searching for the woman he'd married 15 years ago. "Is that what you want, Lisa? To divorce me because I asked your brother to contribute to a household he's lived in for nearly a year?" "What I want is my husband back." Her voice cracked slightly. "What I want is our life back. Our life changed when Dwayne moved in and you allowed him to take advantage of both of us." Frank's voice remained gentle despite the harshness of his words. "I want our life back too, but that means addressing the real issue." "So that's your answer? You're choosing your pride over our marriage?" Frank twisted his wedding ring slowly. "I'm choosing self-respect and healthy boundaries. The question is whether our marriage can accommodate those things." Lisa gathered her purse, the finality of her movements speaking volumes. "I'll give you 1 week to decide, Frank. After that, I file the papers." As she walked away, Frank remained seated, the gold band heavy on his finger. 15 years of shared life balanced against a principle that had come to define his self-worth. No matter which way he chose, something precious would be lost. The question was whether anything valuable could be salvaged from the wreckage their marriage had become. Frank sat at his desk the morning after Lisa's divorce ultimatum, his wedding ring placed deliberately beside his coffee mug. 1 week to decide, she'd said. As if there was a real choice when the terms remained unchanged. The dawn light cast long shadows across his apartment. He'd slept surprisingly well, a kind of clarity emerging from what should have been a night of turmoil. Something had shifted within him during their cafe confrontation. Not anger, but a quiet certainty. He opened his leather planner, the one he'd used to build his accounting practice from nothing, and began making notes in his precise handwriting. If Lisa was serious about divorce, he needed to understand the implications. Not as a threat or countermove, but as a reality to be faced with the same methodical approach he brought to any challenge. Financial considerations, property division, tax implications. Each item listed and considered without emotion, though his hand hesitated when he wrote future relationship parameters. Because despite everything, he still loved her. That was the paradox he'd been wrestling with. How to honor that love while refusing to accept an unhealthy dynamic. "Boundaries aren't punishments," he murmured to himself, the phrase crystallizing something he'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. They're protection for both parties. He picked up his wedding ring, weighing it in his palm. 15 years of shared life couldn't be erased by one ultimatum, but neither could he pretend that returning to the same situation would solve anything. What Lisa needed wasn't capitulation, but clarity, even if she couldn't see it yet. More coffee? Ellen Miller stood beside Frank's table at the Oakwood Gardens community room, pot in hand. The Saturday morning coffee gathering had become part of his routine, though he usually kept to himself with the newspaper. "Thank you." He smiled as she refilled his cup. Ellen had become a surprising fixture in his new life, her direct manner and unfiltered observations oddly comforting. She settled into the chair across from him. "You look like a man who's made a decision." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Is it that obvious? When you reach my age, you recognize the look." She stirred cream into her coffee. "My second husband had that same expression before he finally stood up to his daughter about her spending habits." "Did it work out?" Frank asked, curious despite himself. "Not at first." Ellen's eyes crinkled with remembered amusement. She didn't speak to him for 3 months, but eventually she got herself together, got a job, started paying her own bills. Their relationship was better for it. Frank nodded slowly. "Sometimes caring means not making things easy." "Exactly. Young people today call it enabling." Ellen took a sip of coffee. "Roger, that was my husband, used to say, you can't help someone who's sitting on your shoulders. You have to let them stand on their own feet first." The simple wisdom struck Frank with unexpected force. "My wife's brother has been living with us for almost a year. No job, no contribution." "Ah," Ellen nodded knowingly. "And she chose him over you?" "She gave me an ultimatum. Come home and accept the arrangement, or she'll file for divorce." Ellen studied him over her coffee cup. "And you've decided?" "I think I have." Frank felt a calm certainty settling over him. "I can't help her by surrendering my self-respect, and I can't help her brother by financing his dependence." "It's a hard lesson," Ellen said softly. "Loving someone sometimes means letting them face the consequences of their choices." As Ellen moved on to chat with other residents, Frank remained at the table, the coffee cooling before him. The older woman's validation of his instincts brought not just comfort, but a sense of rightness, a confirmation that standing firm wasn't selfishness, but a necessary step toward healing, whether the marriage survived or not. Sunday evening, Frank stood on his balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and gold. Tomorrow marked Lisa's deadline, though he had already prepared his response. Not a counter-ultimatum, but a clear statement of what he could and couldn't accept. On his coffee table lay a manila envelope containing documents his attorney had prepared, not divorce papers, but a formal separation agreement that protected both their interests while leaving the door open for reconciliation under healthier terms. He had also written a letter, 3 carefully considered pages, that expressed what he couldn't seem to communicate in person: his continued love for Lisa, his understanding of her loyalty to family, and his unwillingness to enable a situation that harmed everyone involved, including Dwayne. His phone had remained silent all weekend. No texts or calls from Lisa as the deadline approached. He wondered if she truly believed he would capitulate, or if she was preparing herself for the next step. Frank turned from the view and re-entered his apartment, closing the balcony door against the evening chill. The space that had once felt temporary now held a certain comfort, a reflection of his growing inner strength. Photos he'd carefully arranged, books that mattered to him, small touches that said, "This is not just where I stay, this is where I live." Whatever happened tomorrow would be difficult. The separation agreement would likely anger Lisa initially. The letter might not penetrate her defenses, but for the first time since being evicted from his home, Frank felt a profound peace with his decision. He wasn't choosing pride over marriage, as Lisa had framed it. He was choosing integrity, with the hope that true reconciliation might eventually grow from that foundation. Whether Lisa could eventually see the difference remained to be seen, but his path forward was clear. Frank placed his wedding ring in its box on the nightstand, not removing it permanently, but setting it aside until its promise of mutual respect and partnership could be truly fulfilled. Frank arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, formal separation agreement in a leather portfolio, his prepared letter tucked alongside it. He'd chosen a different location from their previous meetings, a quiet bistro near his office with more privacy. The deadline Lisa had imposed expired today. He ordered coffee and reviewed his notes one final time. His attorney had advised against meeting in person, suggesting Lisa's divorce threat might be better handled through formal channels. But Frank wanted to give their relationship the dignity of a face-to-face conversation, regardless of the outcome. When Lisa entered, he noticed the subtle signs of strain, shadows beneath her eyes, tension in her shoulders. She wore the blue dress he'd always admired, and he wondered if the choice was deliberate. "Thank you for coming," Frank said, as she slid into the booth. "I assumed you'd be moving back home." Her tone held both hope and apprehension. "Have you decided?" "I have." Frank placed his hands flat on the table. "But it's not as simple as returning or not returning. There are more fundamental issues we need to address." Lisa's expression tightened. "Frank, I was clear about my terms." "Yes, you were." He met her gaze steadily. "And I can't accept them as they stand. But I'm not here to issue counter-demands. I'm here to discuss what might make our marriage work for both of us." She glanced at the portfolio. "What's that?" "Options," Frank replied. "Not ultimatums." Something in his calm certainty seemed to give her pause. For the first time since their separation began, Lisa looked at him not with anger or frustration, but with cautious attention. "I can't kick my brother out," Lisa said after Frank explained his position. "He's family." "I'm not asking you to abandon him," Frank replied. "I'm asking that he contribute to the household or find his own place." "There's a difference." The afternoon light filtered through the bistro's windows, casting patterns across their table. Their coffee had grown cold, untouched during the intense conversation. "You don't understand what Dwayne's been through," Lisa insisted, though her voice held less conviction than before. "Then help me understand," Frank said gently. "Because from my perspective, we've enabled a pattern that isn't healthy for any of us, including him." Lisa twisted her napkin, a familiar nervous gesture. He lost his job when the construction company downsized. It wasn't his fault. That was 14 months ago, 10 months before he moved in with us. He tried to find work. Did he really try? Frank kept his tone neutral. When was his last interview? Has he applied for jobs outside construction? Has he considered training programs? Lisa's eyes dropped to the table. "He says the market is impossible right now. The unemployment rate is under 5%, Frank noted, and I've seen 3 construction sites on my drive to work with hiring signs." A long silence stretched between them. Then Lisa said something that stunned him. "He wasn't at home last night when the power went out." Her voice was barely audible. "He came home the next morning with a new gaming system. When I asked where he got the money, he said, 'Investments.'" Frank remained silent, letting her continue. "He doesn't have investments." Lisa looked up, something new in her expression, a dawning realization. "I found receipts in the trash. He's been working cash jobs for months, telling me he's job hunting while making money I never see. The revelation hung in the air between them, not just Dwayne's deception, but Lisa's acknowledgement of it. "I feel like such a fool," she whispered. "What happens now?" Lisa asked, her fingers tracing the edge of the separation agreement Frank had shown her but not asked her to sign. The evening had deepened around them, their corner of the bistro now illuminated by soft lighting. 3 hours of honest conversation had uncovered layers of misunderstanding and revealed truths they'd both been avoiding. "That depends on what you want," Frank replied. "I'm not issuing ultimatums, Lisa, but I won't return to a situation that undermines our marriage and enables Dwayne's dependency." She nodded slowly. "I talked to my sister yesterday. She said something that's been echoing in my mind. She said I've been treating Dwayne like he's still 16 and needs protection, not like a grown man capable of standing on his own." "Your sister might be onto something," Frank said, with a small smile. "I told him this morning he has 2 weeks to find his own place." Lisa's voice was quiet but firm. "He didn't take it well. Said I was choosing you over family." "And what did you say?" "That he was the one making me choose, not you." Her eyes met Frank's. "That you'd never ask me to stop loving my brother, just to stop enabling him." Frank felt a subtle shift between them, the first genuine alignment they'd experienced in months, not complete resolution, but a step toward understanding. "I don't want a divorce, Frank." Lisa reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of his. "But I don't want to lose myself in this marriage either. I need to know we can disagree without it threatening everything we've built." "That's exactly what I want too," Frank said, finally taking her hand. "Not submission, but partnership. Not enabling, but supporting. There's a world of difference." As they left the bistro together, the separation agreement remained unsigned in Frank's portfolio, not because the issues were resolved, but because they'd chosen a different path, the harder, more honest work of rebuilding what had been damaged. "Will you come home?" Lisa asked as they reached her car. "Not tonight," Frank replied. "I think we both need time to process this, and Dwayne needs to understand this isn't just a temporary standoff." She nodded, disappointment visible, but understanding present. "When?" "When we're both ready to start fresh, not just return to old patterns." He smiled gently. "I haven't given up on us, Lisa. Quite the opposite." As he watched her drive away, Frank felt neither triumph nor defeat, only the quiet certainty that whatever happened next would be built on truth rather than compromise, strength rather than surrender. The path forward remained uncertain, but for the first time in months, it held genuine possibility. Spring sunlight streamed through the windows of Frank's office as he reviewed the quarterly tax filings for his clients. The calendar on his desk showed April, 6 months since the pivotal conversation with Lisa that had changed the trajectory of their marriage. He glanced at the framed photo now displayed on his desk. Lisa and him at Lake Tahoe 3 months ago, their first weekend trip since the separation. Her smile in the picture held a new quality, more genuine than the strained expressions that had characterized their final months living together. The apartment lease had expired in February. Frank had moved back home gradually, first weekends, then 3 nights a week, and finally, last month, he'd given up the apartment completely. The transition had been deliberate, each step taken only when both felt ready. Dwayne had indeed moved out, though not without drama. The 2-week deadline had stretched to 3, then 4, but Lisa had remained firm. Frank had stayed away during that process, giving her space to handle her brother in her own way. She had called him in tears one evening after Dwayne had accused her of betrayal, but she hadn't wavered. Frank's office phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. "Your wife is on line 1, his assistant said. "Hey," Frank answered, smiling at the sound of Lisa's voice. "Just checking if we're still on for dinner with Marcus and Jen tonight?" "Absolutely. I'll be home by 6. Home. The word had reclaimed its meaning, gradually but completely. "Did you see this?" Lisa handed Frank her phone as they sat in the living room after dinner, their guests having departed an hour earlier. Frank scanned the social media post from Lisa's sister, a photo of Dwayne in a construction company uniform, smiling broadly beside a completed deck project. The caption read, "So proud of my brother, 3 months at Riverside Construction and already handling his own projects." "I hadn't seen it," Frank said, handing the phone back. "Good for him." Lisa studied his expression. "You don't seem surprised." "I'm pleased, not surprised." Frank chose his words carefully. Dwayne was always capable. He just needed the right motivation. Lisa settled beside him on the couch, tucking her feet beneath her in a familiar gesture. "I ran into him last week at the hardware store. He was buying tools, actual tools that he paid for himself." "How did that go?" "Better than I expected." She traced patterns on the couch fabric. "He apologized, Frank, said he'd been taking advantage and that losing his free ride was the wake-up call he needed." Frank remained silent, letting her continue. "He's sharing an apartment with 2 other guys from work. Has a girlfriend who's a dental hygienist." A small smile played at her lips. "He even offered to pay back some of what he owes us." "That's significant," Frank acknowledged. "I told him to keep it, invest in his tools instead." Lisa looked up. "Was that wrong?" "Not at all." "It shows you've moved from enabling to supporting. There's a world of difference." Lisa leaned against his shoulder. "He asked if he could come to Sunday dinner next week, just dinner, not moving back in," she added quickly. "I think that would be fine," Frank said, surprising himself with how genuinely he meant it. The anger and resentment that had built over those difficult months had gradually dissolved, replaced by a cautious optimism about all their relationships. "I couldn't have done this without you standing firm," Lisa said quietly, "even when I hated you for it." The porch swing creaked gently as Frank and Lisa sat watching fireflies emerge in the summer twilight. A year had passed since their separation, a year of careful rebuilding, honest conversations, and rediscovered connection. "I've been thinking about renewing our vows," Lisa said, her hand resting comfortably in his. "For our 16th anniversary in September." Frank turned to study her face in the fading light. "That's a wonderful idea." "Not because we need to," she clarified, "but because I understand them differently now." "How so?" Lisa was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "When we first married, I thought love meant never having to choose, that if you truly loved someone, everything would naturally align. Now I realize love is about making conscious choices every day, sometimes hard ones." Frank nodded. "And boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They're foundations to build something stronger on," she finished. "That's what I want to celebrate. Not just that we survived this, but what we've built because of it." Later that evening, as they prepared for bed in the comfortable rhythm they'd re-established, Frank noticed Lisa pausing at the dresser, holding something small. "What's that?" he asked. She turned, revealing his wedding band in her palm, the one he'd set aside during their separation. "I found this in your nightstand when we were cleaning last weekend," she said, her voice gentle. "You never put it back on." Frank looked down at his bare ring finger. "I was waiting for the right moment, for when it would mean what it's supposed to mean again. And now? Lisa held it out to him. Frank took the ring, its familiar weight solid and reassuring. Now it means even more. As he slipped it back onto his finger, the metal warmed quickly against his skin, like coming home after a long journey, familiar yet somehow new. Not a symbol of obligation or confinement, but of a partnership strengthened through trial, built on mutual respect, healthy boundaries, and love that had proven itself resilient enough to endure the hardest truths. Morning sunlight filtered through the kitchen blinds, casting golden patterns on the table where Frank and Lisa sat with their coffee. Outside, birds called to each other in the maple tree they'd planted during their first year of marriage. Inside, the comfortable silence of people who had learned to appreciate simply being together again. "Remember when you first moved out?" Lisa asked, tracing the rim of her mug. "I was so angry I couldn't see straight." Frank nodded. "And I was hurt enough to believe our marriage might be over." "What changed for you?" she asked. "When did you start to believe we could fix this?" Frank considered the question carefully. "When I realized that standing firm wasn't about winning an argument, but about respecting myself enough to expect better, and respecting you enough to believe you could grow." He reached for her hand. "And you, when did you know?" "When Dwayne finally moved out," Lisa admitted. "Watching him actually succeed once he had to stand on his own. I realized I'd been helping him fail all along." Her eyes met Frank's. "And I saw what real love looks like, wanting someone to become their best self, not just keeping them comfortable." They sat in thoughtful silence before Lisa spoke again. "I think that's the lesson in all this. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is hold people accountable, even when it hurts. And sometimes the strongest thing we can do is admit when we're wrong," Frank added. Lisa squeezed his hand. "I'm grateful you didn't give up on us." "I'm grateful you chose us," Frank replied simply. Outside, the day was beginning in earnest. Neighbors leaving for work, children waiting for school buses. Life continuing as it always had, yet everything had changed. Not because circumstances were different, but because they had both learned that love without boundaries wasn't love at all. Just dependence masquerading as loyalty. The harder path of truth had led them back to each other, stronger at the broken places.